Sugar, the sweet truth. So today we're going to zoom in a little bit more on our talks on carbohydrate. We're going to actually look at sugar because it's very much in the public domain at the moment with things like Jamie's sugar tax, with lots of articles within newspapers and mainstream publications talking about the problems of increased sugar risk. So today we're going to kind of look into it and see what the research says. So we're going to do a bit of Sugar 101 just so we're all on the same page when it comes to actually what we mean by sugar. We're going to look at some of the bad sides of it. We're going to ask the question, does sugar make you fat? Is sugar toxic? And is it bad for your health? So Sugar 101, like I said, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So there's a few different types of simple carbohydrates. Remember, we have kind of complex carbohydrates that take the time to be broken down and ones that are more simple in nature that are very quick to digest. And there's kind of two that I want you to know about. So there's glucose, and this is something like Lucozade that you'll find in sports drinks, as well as in lots of the foods that we eat, like pastas and breads and rices. And it doesn't matter if it is complex or if it is simple, all carbohydrates will eventually get broken down into their most simple form, which for most of them is glucose. And the second type of sugar we want to talk about today, I should have mentioned, yes, that the role of glucose is fuel for the brain and the nervous system, and it's also where we store carbohydrate, how we store carbohydrate within the muscles in order to work hard when we're exercising. And the second sugar I want to talk about today is fructose, and this is mainly found in fruit, and it helps to maintain our sugar level. So it's processed in the liver where it's stored, and then if our body detects that our blood sugar is low, we will release some blood sugar from the liver in order to help keep the blood sugar stable. And table sugar, which is known as sucrose, is simply one part of glucose with one part of fructose. So already you should be asking yourself these questions. Well, it's in fruit and it's in a lot of the foods that I already eat. Is just combining these two things potentially very hazardous to me? And you may have heard of fructose being bashed in some papers, again in some media outlets, simply because when we get a concentrated version of it called high fructose corn syrup, which is used in a lot of junk food, then we can potentially see some problems in people, but often it comes down to overeating, and that's something we're going to talk about in a second. And lastly, I just want to cover this because there was, to me, quite a funny recipe recently, which was Davina McCall's sugar-free, and I think it was brownies or some sort of pudding. And it still contains something like close to 90 grams of sugar, because sucrose, which is our table sugar, just because it's table sugar-free doesn't mean it's free of sugar, because you're still getting sugars from, or forms of glucose, forms of fructose from many other different ingredients. So for example, Davina used loads of dates. They're dried, so they're quite a high concentration of sugar within those dates, and to be honest, once they're broken down, your body has no idea if it's come from a Snickers, a Mars bar, a donut, or a fruit. So just because it's table sugar free doesn't mean that it's sugar free. So what are some of the potential downsides to sucrose, table sugar? Well, firstly, it's hyperpalatable, and very simply meaning that tastes flipping good. And when something tastes very good, it means it's very easy to overeat it, especially when it's combined with fat. So if we think of a lot of our junk food that we tend to kind of gravitate towards, things like ice cream, things like cakes, things like sweets, it's often, or chocolate I should say, it's often a combination of high sugar, high fat foods that are very rewarding to the brain. So the brain says, give me some more of that, give me more of that. And it's a double-edged sword, because not only are we is our brain at craving more of it, it has very little impact in terms of how satiating or how filling it is. So it kind of overrides or short circuits our body's ability to tell how much we've actually eaten. So we have this food that's super, our body craves because it's super tasty, but also has very little impact on how hungry we are. So it's very easy to overeat, especially in liquid form. Secondly, your appetite is taste specific. So you'll have often heard, I've still got room for ice cream, I've always got room for dessert. And that's because we can get full on a certain type of taste, but then introduce a new flavour and we've still got room for more. So for example, if you've been out and you've had a steak and chips and you might be stuffed full, but then the dessert menu gets put in front of you, because it's a different taste, maybe it's sweet, maybe it's salty, then your body will actually still be hungry in a sense, or have an appetite to consume more calories of a different variety. And we can see this again when we talk about eating that bowl of rice. If we have a completely plain bowl of rice because it's quite bland, before long you'll get quite full before you want to stop eating. However, if we introduce something that's a little bit sugary, a slightly different specific sensory specific taste, something that's sweet like a sweet chili sauce, then all of a sudden you'd be able to eat more because you have changed the taste that is specific to the appetite. And most of us that are not diligent about our diet may actually do well with eating a little bit less sugar because it means less calories. So we live in quite an alien environment for our biology. So we as humans obviously evolved as hunters and gatherers in a world where calories, food, was pretty hard to come by. So if you found a large bee's nest and there's lots of honey in it, or you found a carcass and you could consume lots of meats and fat, you would get as much in you as possible because that could be the difference between surviving a winter or not. However, now we've got the same biology in a world that is calorie abundant. We live in a world where we can go to the corner shop or we can go to Tesco's, and for very little money we can buy large amounts of calories. And so for a lot of us, there's a good chance that we just tend to overeat on hyperpalatable food that tastes really good, that really doesn't fill us up, and we end up eating more than we actually should. So for a lot of us, just being diligent and actually cutting out some of this added table sugar may just mean less calories. But it brings us to the first question of, does sucrose, does table sugar make us fat? Because if it is inherently fattening, we should be able to put two people or two groups of people on exactly the same calories. Remember, that's the second tier of our pyramid. Calories in, calories out. If we put them on the same calories, but one is on high sugar intake, if sugar is inherently fattening, the high sugar group should gain weight. So what happened? So this was our first of two studies we're going to look at by West and Deloy in 2001. And they took two groups of dieters and they put them on a 600 calorie per day deficit. So let's say they were maintaining weight on 2,600 calories. All these participants were now eating 2,000 calories. So they were all in a deficit by 600 calories per day. And it will differ slightly depending on their size and how many calories they need, but 600 calories a day. Group 1 was on the low sugar diet, so they were on 5% of their calories. So let's say that these people were on 2,000 calories per day. Obviously 5% of that would be 100 calories per day coming from sugar. And the second group, well, they doubled it. So they had 10% of their calories from sugar. So in this instance, it would have been 200 calories coming from sugar. And as I said before, if sugar is inherently fattening, even though they're only eating the same calories, one group should lose more weight than the other. And there was no difference in weight loss. So both groups lost the same. And I know you can look at it there and say, okay, the low sugar group lost 2.2 pounds of fat and the high sugar group lost 3. So actually, according to these results that actually weren't significant, the higher sugar group actually lost slightly more weight than the low sugar group. But realistically, in what we call significant, they both lost the same amount of weight. But we can't just look at one study. So before we move on to the next, let's just get the conclusion. These results provide no justification for the exclusion of added sucrose in weight-reducing diets. So as long as you're in a weight-reducing diet, a calorie deficit, you don't need to remove sugar. But we can't just look at one study. So our second study by Sawit et al. In 1997, this is slightly more compelling. This is why I put it second. They put 20 overweight women on a 6-week diet, and they all had the same protein, carbohydrates, and fats. So they all had the same calories. Group 1, 43% of their calories came from sugar, so they had on average 120 grams of added table sugar per day to their diets. That's 480 calories. Group 2, they had only 4% of calories. So this time we're not just looking at 5 and 10%, we're looking at a really big disparity, nearly 11 times more sugar in Group 1 as opposed to Group 2. And again, what are the results? Both diet groups showed equally significant reductions in weight and percentage body fat. So they both lost nearly 7 pounds over the course of the 6 weeks. And there was no difference despite one group eating 10 grams of added sugar, one group eating 120 grams. When calories were matched, there was literally no difference in weight loss. So the authors concluded, we therefore conclude the use of sucrose or sugar in a weight loss regime is unlikely to cause problems for the average patient as long as total energy intake is restricted. So as long as you're in a calorie deficit, you can enjoy some sugar as part of your as part of your diet. So it doesn't appear to be inherently fattening. But what is it toxic? For sugar to kill a 180-pound man, you'd need to be able to consume roughly 6 pounds of table sugar, so nearly half a stone of table sugar. Now, if we compare that to something like salt, we'd need as little as half a pound of salt, which would be enough to kill a man. And just on a side note, a little caveat, if you are exercising regularly, you don't need to be worried about your salt intake. But the devil's in the dose. So for people to say that sugar is toxic, realistically, I don't know anybody that's going to be able to sit down and eat 6 pounds of pure table sugar. And this goes back to that point I made about Davina and the brownies before. Fruit sugar or table sugar, aloe vera, whatever, however they want, agave nectar, whatever they're trying to market it as, it's still sugar. It will still get broken down into glucose, into fructose, or whatever it is, into your bloodstream. So whilst one may come with slightly more micronutrients, for example, fruits and things like that, they'll still be treated in the same within the body. However, we know, as I said before, when it's just table sugar or very sweet foods, etc., it may cause us to overeat. But from a biological basis, sugar is sugar. So don't get sucked into the idea that it's sugar-free just because it doesn't have any added table sugar in. But what about our health? So we're going to look at this meta-analysis, and remember, a meta-analysis is where we take a load of studies and we put them together, which gives us a stronger overarching view, so we can kind of zoom out and get the bigger picture. And the authors concluded, the potential for overconsumption of sugar in the form of sugary foods and drinks makes targeting sugars as a source of excess calories a prudent strategy. So let's just break that down a little bit. So yeah, for a lot of people, there's a chance that they overconsume sugars. And if they do, then reducing your sugars, because it allows you to reduce your calories, could be a great strategy. However, sugar content should not be the sole determinant of a healthy diet. There are many other factors within the diet, some providing excess calories while others provide beneficial nutrients. Rather than just focus on one energy source, we should consider the whole diet for health benefits. So as always, it's not just one factor, one source of food, one macronutrient that is going to cause us to be overweight. Oftentimes it's targeting excess calories. So if you are over consuming sugars, then it might be a very good reason to cut some down. However, if you're not, they can still be included as part of your diet. And then the second meta-analysis we looked at here, so this is where they actually looked into lots of the different determinants of sugar intake on health. So they looked at the link between sugar and energy regulating hormones, obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, accumulation of liver fat, and neurological responses. And they concluded, data from all these sources do not support linkages between sugar consumption at normal levels within the human diet and various adverse metabolic and health-related effects. Again, it's far more unhealthy to be overweight than it is to be maintaining your weight by eating in your calorie budget and including some sugar. So you kind of take homes for sugar. Sugar is neither bad nor good. I'm not giving it a free ride here because beyond providing some calories and tasting good, it has little nutritional value. High sugar items taste good, we know this, but they're relatively poor at making us feel full, meaning it's easy to overeat them. Remember, they're hyper-palatable. And if they do cause you to overeat, then you will gain fat. So sugar can be consumed, but it's that horrible word within moderation. However, some of us, moderation, we can't do it. We have certain trigger foods, and if you do have them in your home that cause you to overeat, then remove them. So for example, are you the type of person that can't have a small piece of cake, you have to have half the cake? You can't have a biscuit, you end up having half the pack. You can't have a small bowl of ice cream, you have the whole tub. Because if that's the case, you need to remove any chance of giving into those impulses, really. We know that willpower, as we talk about later on, is a limited resource. So take that decision out of your hands and do not have those trigger foods within your house. And actually, many of us would do well replacing some of the sugar in our diet for more filling and satisfying foods. So if you are consuming lots of sugary drinks, you are consuming lots of kind of processed food, maybe replacing some of that for more fruits and vegetables and lentils and whole grains and proteins and fish may actually be more beneficial for you. However, when it's consumed within your calorie budget, sugar can be enjoyed as part of your diet.